Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching and listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. My boy, my brother from another mother, SOS co-founder Brad Hightower. All right, the prestigious Brad Hightower. If you remember SOS, he was the judge. He made a very interesting post on LinkedIn, and I'm glad he's bringing this up because I brought this up too in the past, but I never made entire content around it, but I threw it in there like in different pieces of content, like why are we okay? And I'm not for or against, and I'm going to go through the pros and cons of basically institutional review boards being owned now by private equity firms. And I guess the macro topic is private equity's role in the future of our industry. But we'll start with the institutional review boards because the IRBs are super interesting. And, you know, the whole purpose of an IRB is patient safety and patient ethics, and really to help doctors uphold their duty to do no harm, which is their primary duty as physicians. They all swear an oath, no matter what country, do no harm to patients. And I've worked in this industry 20 years, and I've seen good PIs, I've seen not so good PIs. I've seen bad PIs, although it's rare. Even the bad ones don't do harm to patients. So it's like we're talking about extreme outliers that actually do harm to patients. It does happen. I haven't personally witnessed it, and thankfully we haven't really heard cases about this for a while. We hear about, and I cover with Darshan about on Fraud Pod about lack of PI oversight and things like that. But I'm talking about just like doing harm to patients. Doesn't happen frequently. But the IRBs are supposed to uphold ethics and ensure safety. And first of all, they're supposed to approve protocols, and they're supposed to approve patient-facing material. So if a sponsor wants to do a study, they need IRB approval to do it. And then sites, of course, need IRB approval. And my site here, Yuma Clinical Trials, you see behind me, one of the reasons why small community sites like ours get selected a lot is because we can utilize central IRBs. And these central IRBs are the two big ones now, WCG and Adara, and they're private equity owned. They also, I don't know about both, but I know one for sure is involved, and you can go look at both of their websites if you want. They probably both are operating similarly, or at least have similar strategic objectives. They own a lot of verticals within the space too. They own research sites. I know CRA Academy graduates that went on to work as coordinators at WCG. I remember WCG, and I was surprised they own sites. Yeah, we own sites. They're able to maintain in their policies. They're able to maintain ethical rationale, like conflict of interest. Everything's kind of separate business units, and you give them the benefit of the doubt because they are very big and they have the spotlight on them. So I'm not accusing them of any wrongdoing whatsoever, and I never have been doing that. But there are other issues, second order effects and third order effects we can get into. But there was, interestingly enough, after Brad's post, there was a New York Times article that from 2000, the year 2000, there was a study with the Japanese manufacturer Eisai, EISAI, and they did an Alzheimer's study, and there was a genetic component where they were to get the genetic biomarker, and that biomarker for subjects that tested positive indicated a predisposition to bleeding from the drug, increased risk of bleeding from the drug. and they never disclosed that to the patients. And now the New York Times is actually, there's reporters looking into this, and they came out with a piece about it. And so this is going to start becoming a thing now, with the scrutiny is back on the IRBs. And who owns the IRBs? It's private equity. And private equity is also getting into a lot of research sites. So it's in many ways, it's a great business model what the IRBs have been able to do. They're basically consolidating the various verticals in research. So you need an IRB if you're a sponsor. We got that. That's our core competency. We approve protocols, we approve sites, we approve informed consents, we approve patient-facing advertising, whatever else they approve. But we also provide electronic patient-reported outcomes tools. We also provide the sites themselves. And then they have a whole, they're into negotiating budgets and contracts for sites and business development for sites, and they have conferences. And so they definitely have their hands in just about every vertical in our space. And it's a great business model. And I'm not accusing them of being unethical, because I do believe that you're not going to risk that much money and have conflicts of interest. So they're going to have policies for how the departments communicate and preferential treatment, and they get audited a lot as well by the FDA. And some of the comments on Brad's post, IRBs get audited by the FDA routinely and have to live up to the substantial regulations and standards. They might drive overall company profitability, but no private equity group would ever put quality at risk, because that puts the entire business at risk. And then, so people then commented, well, I'm okay with everything you said except the part about no private equity group would ever put quality at risk. And because that's literally the sentiment, that this happens a lot in private equity across all industries. And another person brought up how IRBs should be considered like the credit agencies for the industry. And then somebody kind of tongue-in-cheek commented back, well, do you remember the subprime mortgage crisis? And so there's pros and cons to this kind of setup. I, again, as an entrepreneur, independent site owner, I'm very far removed from regulatory. I think I would die if I had a regulatory role with the FDA or any regulator. I would absolutely hate that kind of job. So I love self-employed business, entrepreneur advising, all that kind of stuff, especially startups, because I think that's where the real innovation happens. I respect how they've grown, but there are dangers to it, right? There's the conflict of interest. There's the potential to rubber stamp protocols that are maybe not fully ethical all the time. Now, sites also have a role to play in this, because no one's forcing you to accept a study at your site if it's not ethical. And we've turned down studies. We've turned down studies because they had patients do unnecessary procedures that we thought, okay, these seem like exploratory endpoints for patients. And yeah, it's not harm that's being done to the patients, but it's unnecessary. And we're still thinking about the patient comfort and something we would feel good offering a patient in the community. And not every study, unfortunately, is that way. And that's not always the IRB's fault. But you can argue, well, if the IRBs did a little more pushing back on protocol design, would we get different protocols? And we used to have more IRBs, more central IRBs. And for those that don't understand the difference, the central IRBs are kind of like the private IRBs that, most sites like Yuma Clinical Trials, we are not under the jurisdiction of any local IRB. So for example, if we were operating in the hospital here in town, we have a hospital called Yuma Regional Medical Center. They do research. If we operated in their offices, we would be under their IRB's local jurisdiction. But since we are not, we're independent, and the majority of sites are in this category, we can work with whatever IRB the sponsor chooses. And more often than not, it's these two, WCG and Adara. So it's kind of like a duopoly in this space, and that duopoly came about due to consolidation. I personally know 3 owners of IRBs that sold their IRBs to one of these two. So massive consolidation. And then it makes you wonder, well, we're all complaining about protocol design, the patient burden. We're trying to sponsors say they want to reduce patient burden. Sites, look, we turn down studies where we think it's ridiculous, like no patient's going to want to do this. We're not going to waste our time. But a lot of sites take it, and then that's a gray area of whether the IRB should push back. Because the IRB, at the end of the day, is in business. Like, their customer are the drug companies. And their duty is to the patients. But their customers are not the patients. Their customers are the drug companies. It's very similar to the sites. Our duty are with the patients. But the patients don't pay us. The drug companies pay us. The difference is we live in these communities. Our PIs treat these patients. Those are their patients for the most part. They're not going to want to put extra patient burden on their own patients. And by default, as a derivative of the PI, me, the site owner, also does not want to put unnecessary patient burden on the patient. Now, again, is that harm? No, it's not harm. But the IRBs could push back. But because there's only 2, one has to question, maybe that's why maybe that's just one of the factors of why protocols are getting more complex. I'm not putting all the blame on the IRBs. Where my biggest complaints with these IRBs is their user experience. So any site, any coordinator that actually works in this space, they know these 2 websites, one's better than the other, but they like user experience is like really the last thing that they work on. Again, sites are not their customers. Sponsors are their customers. So I know which one coordinators prefer. I'm not going to single them out. But user experience is usually where I make my memes and where I start making fun of the IRBs and how it's a duopoly. And it's just similar to cable companies. If you live in an area where there's only one cable service provider, their customer service is not going to be very good because they don't have to. And so maybe the regulators should look into the IRBs a little more, or maybe there seems to be regulators now looking to break up monopolies, and research seems like too small of a industry. But when you consider how important it is, and now that the New York Times is writing stories about it, maybe they're going to want more IRBs out there. And it's a free market, so you can open an IRB. We've actually thought about it for some time, years ago, and then we got busy with other projects and never did. But it's a steep barrier to entry because you need sponsors, and I've had fed up sponsors. The reason I was going to start an IRB, I've had small biotech sponsors reach out to me and say, do you know any IRBs besides WCG and Adara? They never answer their phone. They never respond to my things, or they're very expensive. And I kept saying, no, I don't. And so I thought, and I still do think maybe there's something here. But anyways, the point is private equity is now also getting into sites. And I'm going to Chicago next week to talk to some private equities. We may be looking to start a site network. We'll make more announcements as we get there. And if we don't, we'll just continue to grow independently and build like a more informal site network, grassroots. We can expand in Yuma and the surrounding areas without private equity investment, but looking to become the platform, I'm interested. So I'm going to talk to some private equity firms. Not all private equity firms are created equal, just like not all revenue and clinical research is created equal. But one can start arguing, okay, well, site networks, sites are consolidating now too. and private equity is getting there, and then private equity looks to consolidate and then merge with other private equity. So now you're getting like almost gonna get not quite a duopoly, because there's about a dozen site networks out there, that and probably 5 of them that are really big, maybe 6. You are getting increased competition there, but there is consolidation as well, because at the end of the day, 10 years from now, maybe there's only 3, and maybe the CROs buy the big ones, and then there's vertical integration there as well as horizontal integration there. And what does the ethics and morality of this look like, and what are the ramifications of this? And if you go by Brad's post, because Brad made, like, a lot of people commented, this is why I thought this is a good topic. Somebody said, I came to the comments, this is a telling one. I came to the comments looking for reasons this situation wouldn't warrant some scrutiny that perhaps I had not considered. I gotta say, I'm actually more concerned now that I've seen the quality of the justifications for why this is a reasonable argument. And somebody else said, this is a non-issue. Many companies in this space and sites are owned by private equity. On the plus side, they have more resources to spend to ensure quality. On the downside, yes, they are controlled. Then Brad said, do you think private equity involvement in healthcare has resulted in a net improvement? And the guy says, probably depends. I can tell you, private equity in large health systems, like in a community like this, the independent physicians are being pushed out, and the quality of care is not better. And I'm hearing this same sentiment across multiple communities across the country. So that's on the private practice side, not research. Research is different. Somebody said, I would agree, except they became so owned, they made massive movements in turnaround times. Disclosure, I am a former WCG, although I never worked on the IRB side. So this person said, site sponsor experience, while the competition has kept market pressure on pricing, demand has grown substantially. If you don't believe me, ask folks who used to submit regularly in 2005 to 12. Vague concerns on the bias of unspecified conflict do not serve anyone well. But I don't think not talking about it serves anyone well either. It's a decent and reasonable topic for discussion. Somebody else said, when I was in trial management, we relied heavily on WERB, and having dealing with university IRBs, I can understand the desire for commercial central IRBs. The local ones are slow, but now Adara has turned itself into a CRO. They have protocol development, contract auditing, CTMS. There's something concerning about the conflicts of interest that start brewing. So there's people on both sides have strong opinions. Again, I don't suspect anything unethical is going on. I don't think they would be that stupid, number one. And number two, I don't think most people are inherently evil. But I do think it does require some critical thinking on our part. We all participate in the same ecosystem. Private equity is a force. And is it okay that the ethics committees can own sites and all the other tech and horizontally and vertically integrate? And you would find people arguing both sides of it. I think they should be allowed to. I'm a free market capitalist. But I do think there should be maybe incentives for more competition, and maybe this is an encouragement for people to start their own IRB. I'm happy as a small site that we do have that we do not have a local IRB, so we can use the central IRBs because they are pretty simple to get approval. But it does feel like a cookie cutter process, which I'm not complaining about as a site. The user experience sucks on these websites, and getting someone to help you kind of sucks. But I can understand the sponsor side of it too. So something to consider. I want to know in the comments what you guys think. What does private equity mean getting more involved now in the site side? Okay, the CROs, they're not private equity. They're publicly traded. So they're public equities. But some of them go private and public all the time. And then they're starting to buy sites too. So maybe one day you'll have an IRB that owns a sponsor, the IRB, the CRO, the sites, and the vendors. So it's literally one study being done in the same ecosystem, even though they say it's separate. Is that okay? Because ultimately the consolidation's kind of headed towards that place. Anyways, like, subscribe, comment, share. Happy Halloween. The last video with this background. We'll be talking about Thanksgiving pretty soon, but if you're watching in the future, it doesn't matter. Bye-bye. Hey, if you guys like that kind of content, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Stay tuned for more videos.